Alrighty. Recording. Alright. Welcome back to another ANEZMIND reaction. This video is comes from the channel The Motive. Once again, never heard of the channel, but this new page that I've created has really been on a roll and has done a great job at giving me suggestions of videos which are either informational, inspirational, or, you know, all the great things you could think of. The title of this video is The Horrific Reason Why You Must Be Careful with Your Actions. The speaker throughout this video is no other than Jordan Peterson. Let me just make this full screen already. I don't think there's really much for me to say before we get started on this video. I'm trying to think of something. A lot of this is on the fly, so forgive me. Let's not force it. Let's get right into the video. All right. Don't need to pop. All right, you're good, bud.
Jung had this idea that people's shadows reach all the way down to hell, which is actually a very frightening concept. And what he meant by that is that if you take a look at the impulses that drive you that are actually malevolent, if you can admit to such impulses, that if you follow those all the way down to their origin, you find some very nasty things. And what you find down there basically is what allies you with people who've done terrible things. That's not a very pleasant experience, I would.
Early into the video, I know. But that's big, what he said. And that's something I challenge myself with every single time. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's one of the reasons why I get intoxicated. Because I do try to push myself to my limits. Or even when I'm sober, not even when I'm intoxicated. Sometimes I wish to put myself in certain situations just to see what comes about within me. Because a lot of times we deem or think to know ourselves, and we think we have an understanding or control of who we are and what goes on. But a lot of times, if you pay attention to what goes on, not even just physically, mentally, emotionally, and you pay close attention to your thoughts, you kind of, see some of these dark thoughts come about. And a lot of people have this knack for pushing them down and saying, don't pay attention to them. We got to suppress them. But, to each their own. But I personally try to play with these thoughts. And I think in playing with these thoughts, in trying to befriend them in a sense, I've become more apt at using them in a useful way, in a beneficial way, not just for me, but also other individuals. I understand the dark parts of me, and I know which situations bring them about, and I know how to persuade myself into doing something. That was a horrible way to phrase it, but I guess for lack of better words. But yeah, I just lost my train of thought, so I guess we'll get back to the video. I had something I wanted to say, but that's very interesting.
Although one thing that's worth thinking about is that it is something that can protect with
Take it back.
people who've done terrible things. That's not a very pleasant experience, I would say. Although one thing that's worth thinking about is that it is something that can protect you against being very, very badly hurt. Because one of the things that characterizes people who develop post-traumatic stress disorder is that they're often naive. And then they encounter something that's really not within their framework of thinking, and it's usually something bad. There isn't anything in their philosophy, their way of looking at the world, that has prepared them for that. They end up fragmented and devastated. And so it's actually protective to you if you can figure out what your full range of capabilities is, because that can help you understand other people a lot better and to be wiser and more careful in your actions. It's also useful, I think, if you want to convince yourself to act properly, because if you regard yourself as harmless, which is a big mistake, then nothing you can do is really that bad, right? Because you're harmless after all. But if you understand that you're seriously not harmless, then that can make you a lot more careful with yourself. And
That's especially true. Oh well, that's he said it too. But what you call it? If I think that's the whole idea about being aware. You know, this rise in consciousness that seems to be taking over, I guess, the spiritual side of social media. But I think a lot of it is just coming to I don't want to say understanding, because I don't think you ever come to a full understanding, but getting to a place where you look to be more consciously aware, put in more, well, first become more consciously aware of what you are doing, what you are thinking, what you are feeling. And then that's in turn allows you to become more consciously aware of the people around you, of the world. Because I think the way that works is that since you kind of come to an understanding, I keep on saying understanding, but since you come to awareness of yourself, you can now find things in this life to compare and contrast yourself to. And by becoming more aware of yourself, it's the same that idea of yin and yang. You know, once you understand one side of things, you can then use that same side to make sense of the other side. I don't know if I'm phrasing this correctly. Maybe he'll get into it and relay it more fluently and more clearly. But yeah, it's great
say that
thoughts. Great
that's
thoughts.
especially true maybe when when you have kids and you start dealing with your kids. If you know that what you're capable of because you're human, then that can motivate you to be much more careful with what you say and do. And I don't mean cautious. I don't mean timid. I don't mean any of that. I just mean that you want to keep things pristine between you and your children, let's say, because that way they're on your good side. And you want them on your good side, because children who get on their parents' bad side suffer very badly for it. And sometimes it's because they're literally abused, but more often it's because they get abused, let's say, or neglected in much more subtle ways. And you're definitely capable of that. I mean, all you have to do is think about the way that you've interacted with someone that you've decided to not like, or maybe someone you genuinely don't like, you know. And that can range from just not paying any attention to them, especially if they're doing something good, to really pursuing them and making their life miserable. And you can certainly do that with your family members, and you can do that with your intimate partners, and you can do that with your friends, and you can do it with yourself. And so it's really worth knowing that. So Fox thinks he's a royal rule breaker, but he's really just a two-bit thug, and this is where he learns that. So the coachman's got these guys in his grasp now, regardless, and partly because they're already down this road and they can't back off, and partly because he also offers them more money than they've seen before. And so as bad as they are, they're going to get worse. Many of you, I presume, have seen Breaking Bad. And that's a really good example of the incorporation, at least in part, or maybe the possession by the shadow from the Jungian perspective, right? Because you have this ordinary high school teacher who really thinks that he's an axe, and his family as well. You know, like your typical persona, roughly speaking. He's just a normal guy. Part of the reason that he's a normal guy is because he actually hasn't been put in abnormal circumstances, and then all of a sudden he is. And he has a genuine moral conundrum, right? He's going to die of lung cancer, and he has a son who's got a lot of health problems, and he's terrified that he's going to leave his wife and his child behind with nothing. And then, of course, has the story. And so he decides to do something that temporarily that he regards as, what they would normally regard as reprehensible. And of course, he just gets tangled up in that. But then as the story unfolds, you see that it's more complicated, because it's not that he was just innocent, good guy and he decided to turn bad. He's also very resentful and angry. And it's partly because he's a bit of a pushover at the beginning, or maybe more than a bit of a pushover. And also that he didn't really fulfill his own potential, and that, you know, he had friends who walked down the entrepreneurial path, and maybe they weren't quite fair to him, but whatever, he ends up not very successful as a high school teacher. So he's really angry about that. And so there's more motivation for him opening up the door to the terrible elements of his personality than just the fact that he's got good motivations to do so. And that unfolds, you know. And so you see the warps and twists in his resentful character increasingly manifest themselves as he walks down this road to really total brutality. And it's quite good. There's a book called Ordinary Men that's a lot like that. I don't think I've mentioned that to you before, but Ordinary Men is a book about, it's the best book of its type. maybe it's the only book of its type. It's possible, but it's plotted much like Breaking Bad in some sense. It's a story about these German policemen in early stages of World War II. And they were guys who were old enough to be raised in Germany really before the Hitlerian propaganda came out in full force. You know, if you were a teenager, say in the 1930s, you were going to be pulled right into the propaganda machine, and maybe you were part of the Hitler Youth, and like you were raised in that. But if you were older, then you were raised before that, and you're not as amenable to propaganda once you're older than about 22 or something like that. It's pretty young, actually.
I was gonna. Oh, this video's about to come to an end, but that's a thought that was brewing in my mind as the video was playing on. Um, I've read a lot. Well, I don't want to say a lot. I don't think I've read as much as I can or as much as I want to, but I've read some into Carl Jung's theory about integrating the shadow, which he believes that each individual, has. But uh, something I do, but I guess I'm asking you guys if you guys ever do that. Like, if you ever compare yourself to the what they've been deemed as, the worst human beings that have, you know that has lived or that has passed through time. Some of the you know the Hitlers of the world, or the Stalins of the world, or what's his name? Was it Pol Pot? I think was his name, or even El Chapo's, warlord. Was it? I think they're just called warlords. But yeah, just comparing yourself to those individuals, and you. But it is. I think it's just something to think about whenever next time you discuss some of the evil men in history. I think it would be beneficial to you as a individual to sit there and think and ask yourself whether you could have ever committed or enacted such atrocities, if you could ever took part in something like that. Because I think what he's getting ready to say, talking about the young man, being born in a certain time, in a certain culture, certain way of life, and you really do just become a product of the environment, product of what's going on around you. At a young age, you're always susceptible to ideas and ideologies and different doctrines. So it's a hard thing to discuss. I might have went into a circle. I might have not said anything all throughout this whole pause, but the whole idea I think I just want to get across is that, I think, me personally, I look to ask myself if whether I could have done any of these things these other evil men in history have done. And I think when you choose to answer with yes, you kind of start to play it out in your head, and you kind of see where you like, I have a thought in my head, but I'm at a loss for words right now. So I guess I'll just get back to the video.
You're going to make a soldier, you have to get a soldier young, because once people are in their early 20s, say, they already have their personality developed. Anyways, these policemen were sent into Poland after the Germans marched through, and it was wartime, and there was this hypothesis in Germany that the Jews in particular were operating as a fifth column and undermining the German war effort, because of course the Germans blamed the Jews and a variety of other people for actually setting up the conditions that made the war necessary. And so when the police were sent into Poland, they were also required to make peace, roughly speaking. And so they started out by rounding up all the Jewish men between 18 and 65 and gathering them in stadiums and then shipping them off on the trains. But that isn't where they ended. They ended in a very, very dark place. I mean, these guys were going out in the field with naked pregnant women and shooting them in the back of the head by the end of their training. And what's really interesting about that is that their commander told them that they could go home at any time. So this is not one of those examples of people following orders. And the reason they didn't, roughly speaking, there's many reasons, but one of the reasons they didn't is because they didn't think it was comradely, so to speak, to leave the guys they were working with to do all the dirty work and run off. That's really an interesting fact, because you'd in different circumstances, you wouldn't think about that as reprehensible, right? You'd think, well,
Right.
that's part of teamwork and under rough circumstances. And that's at least in part how they viewed it. And they were also made physically ill multiple times, physically and psychologically ill by the things that they had to do, but they kept doing them anyways. So it's one step at a time. And that's the thing, is that you end up in very bad places one step at a time. So you got to watch those steps.
Yeah, man. No, great video. Uh, the note on which he ended it, this video ended on. I'm sure the lecture still went on, but um, you know, I have a lot of thoughts going through my head right now. I usually just sit with them and just play with them in my mind, and it's hard to get them out and talk about them in a moment. That's why I choose to write. I have my writing page. I can focus on any thought in which I want to tackle in that time, and I can write 20 pages on it. But to talk about it in the moment, it could be difficult for me sometimes because my mind goes from here to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, and I gotta find a way to focus to hone in on a single thought and be able to speak about it in fullness, to the fullest extent of which I can. But that's besides the point. A lot could be said about war times and their decision makings, and the context in which surrounds an individual's decisions. But like this video title is kind of advocating, the reason why you must be careful with your actions. I think all in all, you know, for I guess a layman explanation, be careful with your. The reason why you must be careful with your actions because it could obviously lead to um, unfavorable circumstances in the future. But that's a layman expert explanation and summary of this video. Um, I can't say all I need to say now, but if you do have a thoughts, I'll more than happy to join you guys in the comments and have conversations with you guys about what you think about this video, the thoughts that came to you throughout. But yeah, leave a like, make sure to subscribe, turn on post notifications. Once again, to end it off, do leave a comment because I would like to have a conversation with you. Good day.